One of the most anticipated moments of my life eventually became one of, if not the most, scary experience of my life. You've likely heard about people who graduate from high school or college, and then they go and backpack through Europe or something. I was always intrigued by the idea, but I really didn't want to go through Europe. However, I had seen a lot of movies that had taken place in California, with people driving up or down Highway 1. So, seeing areas on a screen such as Big Sur and others, I decided to backpack down the coastline of California on the Pacific Ocean. I had always been fascinated with the coast of California. It was so interesting to have the ocean and the mountains there right next to each other. I know a lot of people think of California and they automatically think of places like San Francisco and LA, but the state actually has quite a lot of beautiful countryside as well. I began in the north and then began walking south. I had parked my car in Monterey Bay, and my plan was to walk south, enjoy some time in the country out there, and then take a bus back to Monterey Bay when I was done. During the day, I did most of my walking along the coastline. If you've never been on the coast of California, it's pretty unique, and fortunately, it's warm enough in certain areas that I was just able to sleep right there on the beach without even using a tent or sleeping bag, or anything like that. This would change though when I got more into the mountains and further away from the road. During the first night, I marveled at the dense fog that came up off the ocean. It crept slowly off the ocean and up out onto the beach. It wasn't very long before I was completely enveloped by the fog, and that was an experience that, although it's not the main scary thing that happened to me, it was also pretty scary in and of itself. I had been in fog many times before, but never a fog that was so thick that it was completely covering me. Also, I was worried about hearing strange noises in the fog, and believe me, there were always plenty of strange noises at night. More or less, though, I was not really afraid of anything. Maybe just a little bit on edge, but the good kind of on edge, if that makes sense. You know, like when you watch a horror movie and you're scared even though you know nothing can possibly happen to you. As I continued to travel further south, I made my way up the coast and into the hills, and that was the main point of my journey. I strayed a bit from the road, but I figured I shouldn't be too far away from it, lest I get lost. I was also worried about possibly getting in trouble because I was in an area that I wasn't quite supposed to be in. If that happened, I could just make my way back to the road and tell the person I had only strayed a little bit away from it. It was a few days into my walk that something happened that I wasn't expecting. A heavy storm began moving in. It hadn't been on any of the weather reports before I had left, but the weather can change pretty quickly after all. If you live in California, as I have all of my life, you know that thunderstorms are very, very rare the further south you travel. I tried to keep walking as long as I could, but I figured it would be in my best interest to set up my tent pretty early that evening. I didn't want to get completely soaked through. I managed to get everything up and situated before the storm hit, and when it did, it was a doozy. The thunder cracked and hurt my ears. The lightning completely lit up the dark sky, and the wind was so heavy it threatened to tear my tent right out of the ground. I wasn't necessarily worried about the tent, it was pretty heavy duty, but it seemed like something that was possible. The storm went on for a while. I tried to find something to do. I had a book light and tried to do a little light reading with the storm as a backdrop. Even though the rain was falling and the rain was loud though, I stopped for a moment when I thought I heard something strange. Listening a little bit closer, it sounded like there was something just outside. There were some rustling sounds, but they didn't quite match up with the billowing of the wind. It was hard to tell what exactly I was hearing, and the storm was still raging pretty hard. I turned out my book light and tried to listen closer. I imagined any animals that might be out there would probably have already found shelter. I began wondering if maybe it was a person, and why exactly a person would be out in this sort of weather. I kept listening closer and closer, and was convinced that someone was out in the woods there. It was the creepiest and eeriest feeling I've ever had in my life. I was trying to keep an ear out, but it was too hard because there was just so much background noise. If someone was out there, I wondered what the hell they would be doing out in a storm like this in the middle of a forest. As I waited and waited, I kept hearing these noises, but wasn't sure about anything. Then suddenly, without warning, one corner of my tent collapsed in, as if someone had just yanked one of the stakes out of the ground. Then, moments later, another one did the same. I didn't have much time to react, but I did what I could. I had my backpack, though not with everything in it, and unzipped the tent and ran off toward the road. Like I mentioned, I didn't stray too far from it. Once I got there, I hid off on the other side of the road, getting pelted by the hard rain as I waited. I was there for quite a while, looking back toward the area I had just run from, but I didn't see anything there. I kept waiting for whoever or whatever had pulled those stakes out to come and get me. I was really freaked out, and I waited there in the rain until I thought enough time had passed and the sun began coming up. I wanted several times to go back to my tent, but I just couldn't get up the nerves all night to do it. I couldn't force myself to go in that direction. Eventually, when I did make it back to my tent, it was completely ruined. Everything that I had left in it when I ran off was also ruined as well. I guess that's not as bad as running into whoever had done it though, and at least I was still alive, cold, wet, but unharmed. I remained on the road the next day until I came across an inn. I forget the name of it, but thankfully I still had my wallet and my money. I was able to get a room and put the scary night behind me. I never finished my trip though. As soon as I was able to get a bus ride back north, I went ahead and took it. That experience ruined camping for me. When I was younger, I only went to summer camp one time, and for the most part it was not as bad an experience as I was expecting at all. However, there was one thing that made it more memorable than anything else. I was 12 or 13 at the time. It was a while ago, and my birthday was in the summertime, so that's why I can't remember exactly. But I guess it doesn't really matter, does it? It just gives you a bit of an idea of what I was like by knowing how young I was. I was sort of a medium popular kid in middle school. I wasn't bullied or anything like that. I played sports, but I wasn't great at it. I wasn't really popular, so you might just think I was sort of in between the popular and unpopular kids. This didn't matter at camp, though. I didn't even know anyone at all who was there. I kind of preferred it that way. It was more interesting to get out and meet new people. Anyway, there were several cabins on one side of the camp for all the boy campers. The girl cabins were on the other side. And kind of funny when you think about it, but I figure there was less of a chance of anything going on if the boys and girls were kept far away from each other at nighttime. I got to my cabin early enough that I was able to pick out my own bed. I chose a top bunk that was at the back of the room. I also chose the top bunk because there happened to be a nice window right next to it. I figured if I was having problems sleeping, and I knew that it was quite likely that I was going to, I would be able to entertain myself by staring out the window. The window faced away from the camp and into the forest. The first night I was there, I noticed something even more interesting about the bed I had chosen. There was a light in the back of the cabin that shined into the space between the back of the cabin and the trees. It didn't shine at the cabin, so it didn't pose a problem of keeping me awake, but it added an almost spooky atmosphere the way it shined out into the forest. A lot of time passed in camp without anything strange happening at all. I got to do all sorts of really fun things a kid can do at camp, although there were quite a few boring things as well. I made a few friends, which I was pretty happy about, and surprisingly, I found the food was actually pretty good too. I did have a lot of problems going to sleep though. It's just one of those things where it's hard to sleep in a bed that isn't my own. I still get like this to this day. In fact, living in hotels is very hard for me, and even after being there for a few weeks, I still haven't really gotten used to sleeping in that bed. Anyway, a few weeks into my camp, I was just laying in my bed, listening to the other boys in the room snoring away. I was certain that everyone was asleep other than me, so I just lay there on my back, staring out the window. I was sitting there for who knows how long, well, actually lying on my back, when there was suddenly some movement that caught my eye. One of the camp counselors, a teenager who was in charge of one of the other cabins, was walking around the corner of mine. He was a tall, strong guy. If I remember correctly, he also played baseball and football in high school. It seemed the counselor was walking around looking for something. He had a flashlight and kept on shining it out into the forest. I heard him talking a little too, but it wasn't really loud enough to make out what he was saying. Suddenly, I jumped up in my bed as I saw something I never expected. A huge man jumped out of the trees and quickly tackled the camp counselor to the ground. He was much bigger than the counselor and was hitting him as he fell to the ground. I screamed. Really, it was the first and last time in my life that I ever spontaneously screamed, and of course that woke up nearly everyone in the cabin with me. My counselor from my cabin quickly ran over to me, and in the middle of asking me what was wrong, he looked out the window and saw it right away. Telling us all to remain in the cabin, he ran out to try and help the other counselor. Well, this was a cabin with about 12 teenage country boys in it. There was little to no chance we were going to remain in that cabin while they figured out what was happening, and we didn't. Most of them ran outside. I didn't, though. I continued to watch everything from the window, and although the second counselor wasn't able to overpower the man, with the help of a few other older boys in the cabin, they were able to eventually, with the help of the second counselor, pull the man off. There was some sort of noise horn going off or something like that. It was a really strange atmosphere. The other campers were trying to beat the guy, but eventually the other counselor showed up and the man was completely subdued. The man was a guy who had a warrant out for his arrest for a violent crime. He had been hiding out by the river that the camp was on. I guess he had come close to the camp at night, looking to score some food, but the counselor had noticed that something was wrong. Like me, he had had some problems sleeping away from home. Although the story ended up with a good ending, it haunted me for the longest time. Seeing this man just jump out of nowhere like he did was terrifying. Prepubescent boys simmering with testosterone might be kind of annoying sometimes, but hey, they helped that counselor out, so it was a good ending in the end. This is kind of a weird story. It happened when I was out on a camping trip by myself. I've been camping by myself for as long as I can remember. Just to give you a bit of an idea, I'm an only child. I grew up out in the country. Although I had plenty of cousins, we didn't live very close to each other, but I always liked camping, so I began camping out by myself quite a bit. I never had any strange or really scary experiences when I was younger in camping. I wasn't afraid of the dark, and I was never afraid when I was out camping on my own. I always felt like I was safe in the environment that I was comfortable with. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the camping trip just to take up space. I will give you a little bit of background though. This happened when I was 25 years old. I was taking a week-long camping trip in the summer. The place that I was camping in was not an official campground. It was in the hills behind the property that one of my aunts lived on, so technically I was not supposed to be there. I camped out in a very good spot out on a hill though. I could go downhill to a creek in order to get water, but I liked being up on the hill because it was high and I had a really good view of the surroundings. I kept a fire burning at all times. It was necessary, of course. If you've been camping for a decent period of time, you would know how important fire can be. I was sleeping and not really sure what time it was, but when I opened my eyes, it was still very dark around me. There was light, but it was coming from outside of the tent, and it was my fire. I looked around trying to figure out what had just woken me up. Normally, I can sleep through almost anything, and that's when I noticed the scariest thing I had ever seen in my life. The fire had illuminated a wall of the tent, but it also revealed something else. It showed me a shadow. It was the shadow of a large man, just sitting by my fire. I felt a jolt or sort of a jarring feeling, and I just barely kept myself from making a noise. This was weird, and an unprecedented event. I really had no idea how I should react. I decided the smartest thing to do was to not call attention to the fact I had woken up and that I had already noticed him out there. And trying to make as little movement as possible, I slowly reached over to my backpack. I had a fillet knife that I used to prepare fish from the creek. Slowly bringing the backpack closer to me, I reached in as quietly as I could and extracted the knife from inside of it. I kept glancing back over at the shadow to see if it had moved yet or not, but it still hadn't. I guess on some level that was comforting, because he hadn't noticed that I was up or moving. I lay there for who knows how long in the dark, holding that fillet knife close to me. I kept waiting to see what this stranger was going to do. He just kept by the fire, and I assume occasionally looking over at the tent. Perhaps he was expecting me to get up or something like that. I don't know. I tried to tell myself that maybe it was nothing. Perhaps it was just the owner of the property, and he was waiting for me to get up and tell me to get off his land. But that didn't make much sense to me. If he wanted me gone, he would have just woken me up himself. But also, if he was there to kill me, he probably would have woken me up too. Finally, he did something, but it wasn't the thing I wanted to see. I watched as the man stood up and walked right over to the tent. He stopped when he got to the door flap of the tent, and I felt my heart begin to beat extremely fast. I slowly moved my hand, holding the knife close to me, but in such a way that I could strike if the man opened my tent and attacked me. Instead, though, he just stood there in front of it. I could feel him looking at me through the tent, even though I knew he couldn't possibly be. It was very creepy and weird, and uncomfortable as well. I don't know how long we stayed in that stalemate, but finally he moved away. Rather than sit back in front of the fire, though, the man just walked out of sight. I had no idea where he went, but I was not prepared to go right back to sleep. I had no idea if he was just hanging out in the woods waiting for me to start snoring or something. I just couldn't rest at all. All I could do was wait until morning, and the moment day broke, I packed up my camp and ended my camping trip early. I was really shaken up at the time, but thankfully he didn't attack me or anything. I now only camp in places where I'm allowed to do it, though. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. I hope you guys are enjoying this sort of daily upload thing. I'm trying to upload as much as possible while I still have the time to, mostly because I find it fun and there's not much else to do while COVID is around, so I hope you guys are enjoying that. If you guys liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. These stories were all submitted to me through my email by subscribers. If you guys would also like to submit stories for me to read in the video, please be sure to take a look in the description below. It will have links to all my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. You can go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to your story as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, so I can make it a nice, healthy, long video. Also, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, the theme of the story if it has one, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Also, make sure you use proper grammar and spatial paragraphs and all that stuff, because it's kind of hard to read wall of text submissions. If you guys are new to the channel and you like this, I have two other channels, one where I do disaster documentaries, and another one where I do true crime videos. I do both of those once a week. You'll find links to those in the description as well. Those are called Mr. Blue Skies and Darkest Hour, respectively. Special thanks to my artist. His links to his social media will be in the description below. He does all of my artwork for this channel, and he does the thumbnails as well. If you like his art, so you can check his social media out, and he'll be able to get you something real cool if you're in the mood for that. If you guys are curious about the music, it's listed in the description below in the order which it appears with links to the artists. Other than that, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.